Well, welcome officially to the Cresa Hybrid Workforce webinar, How to Affirm and Operationalize Your Strategy. I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa Hybrid Workforce Services, and I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer. Steve has joined us, so welcome, Steve. So, there's a workforce trend happening right now that's both frightening, but also exciting in one sense. Frightening because it can cause real disruption for any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the economy, and exciting because of the possibilities that it offers for organizations who capitalize on this trend. So I'm going to let the news headlines do the talking. This frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines. In the Wall Street Journal, forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. From Fortune Magazine, job hopping heats up. 65% of U.S. workers are now looking for a new job. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, with new opportunities and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. This is a chart from the U.S. Labor Department. This shows the number of U.S. workers leaving their job as a percentage of the total number of jobs in the economy. And this ratio is called the quits rate. And quits are voluntary separations from jobs. It's a good barometer of worker confidence in the ability to get another job. Now, a few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph is September 2009. This is just coming out of the Great Recession. Hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job, and the quits rate was 1.2%. Then the economy began to improve, and slowly the number of people leaving jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April 2020. However, 1 year later, in April 2021, when at first we felt like we were coming out of the pandemic, a little bit of a false summit, the quits rate skyrocketed to a whopping 80%, to 2.8%. This is the highest level since at least 2000. In May, it decreased to 2.5%, still well above any time in the past 20 years. But then in June, it jumped back up to 2.7%, and July, also 2.7%, and then jumped back up again to 2.9%, and in September, 3%. Now, this survey, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, comes out once a month. September was the most recent month that we had numbers for until today. So just today, hot off the press, the new number is out, and it's still a staggering 2.9%. So basically we're hovering up there in that high 2.8, 2.93%, and this is being called the Great Resignation. So what can be done about it? Well, what are organizations doing to recruit and retain talent in the midst of this war for talent? Some are offering raises and bonuses. Some are extending perks, such as free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to design engaging office environments as an attractor to keep their employees right where they are. Google's a good example. Google is building and repurposing office spaces to make them more inviting, using ideas like cool outdoor hangouts with teepees for team meetings. They're trying to make the office a place where you want to go, and candidly, are willing to make the commute to get there. And finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they've learned about remote work over the past year and a half and combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Ford Motor Company is a good example. Ford announced a really progressive hybrid work model for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours approved by their managers. And that's coming from a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. And I think this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. And she says, look, if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 12 months, it's that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. So the question most organizations are asking now is, if a hybrid workforce strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest talent, then what should the balance be for my organization? What should our strategy be between remote and office? In other words, what's the right hybrid blend? And then once we've decided the right blend, how do we put it into practice? Fairly, equitably, without opening ourselves up to blind spots that we didn't think of in advance. Clearly, you need a plan. You need a plan to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department or each functional team within an organization. Many businesses feel like the person who's on the screen. There are so many paths to choose from, so many variables to consider, both known and unknown. Many organizations feel stuck right now, and they're struggling to build consensus on a path forward. So if you're interested in answering questions like, well, what is the right blend for our organization? And what are the criteria for a successful hybrid workforce strategy? What's the roadmap to navigate to the right blend of remote work and office? And then finally, how do we operationalize our strategy and put it into action? And this is the webinar for you. As mentioned, I'm Jason Jones. I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now exclusively leading 2 of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services. Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy expertise to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, to name a few. Paul has over 25 years of experience working with nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Conservation International is one example, helping to integrate human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. Today, we'll have about a 45-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar and send out a copy afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. You can hover over, should be a green bar down there, and when you do, icons pop up and there's a Q&A feature. And we really want you to use this at any time throughout the presentation or the webinar, because we don't want you to wait until the very end when you may have forgotten about some of the questions that you had along the way. We'll get to all the questions at the end, but as you come across ideas or you have thoughts that you want to share them with us. We love having the interaction, and others can benefit from your questions as well as your comments. So today, we're going to address number 1, context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective, the benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy, its key elements, and a roadmap to affirm and operationalize your hybrid workforce strategy. So we start with context for the timeline of the pandemic. Phase 1, that was the immediate phase. Overnight, people were forced to work from home. Phase 2 is the endure phase. We continue to endure, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, maintaining culture. Phase 3 is the post-COVID, post-pandemic phase, which we call the sustain and compete phase. Organizations will strive to sustain a new way of working that leverages what they learned about remote work while recapturing all of the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase 2 to phase 3, you've got to go through a transition. And that is where we are right now, or should I say, that's where you should be right now, is thinking about this transition. But before you can move forward with an actual transition plan, you've got to ask a key question. And this is a question that addresses the powerful workforce desire for freedom to choose where and when the employee works. And this key question, we suggest it's one that you ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us and our organization that will be reflective of our culture and, number one, minimize expenses and minimize the threat to business continuity? Delta pops up, the Delta variant, Omicron pops up. Who knows what's going to pop up next? But also, while minimizing threats and minimizing expenses, what will maximize employee productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results? So you see, these are the key business drivers that inform our planning process for a hybrid strategy and its implementation. But in order to evaluate different strategies, we start by understanding the benefits and the challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. But I want to pause for just a moment before we get into that and make a quick point about bias. Bias can blind you to the opportunities presented by different points of view. It may seem elementary to review benefits and challenges of remote versus office because most of us have been living this for 12 to 18 months. We pretty much know the benefits of remote and the shared office. However, it's very important that when you begin your planning process to collectively agree as a team on what benefits are of both of options, right? What are the benefits of both and what are the challenges of both? In order to foster objectivity around this process of agreeing on a hybrid strategy and ensure your organization remains open-minded, start your planning process with a dialogue, an open dialogue, about the benefits and the challenges of both. Now, at the top of the list for the benefits of remote working is reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal cost to the employees of reduced commute, reduced costs for clothes and food, etc. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state that their work-life balance is better. On the other hand, the benefits of the office, time-proven, and they've really crystallized during this pandemic. Highlights on the screen include those things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. Now, one benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. The reason why it's a benefit of both is because according to multiple surveys, and the number fluctuates, but it's somewhere around 70% of all employees, office-based knowledge workers, want a hybrid experience. What that means is organizations will have to offer some degree of flexibility, which means both remote working opportunities and shared office opportunities for the very same employee in order to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. However, even with all the benefits of a hybrid workforce environment, there are several challenges to plan for, and we're going to highlight 3 scenarios that organizations will likely be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A, for instance. Team A has a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She's on board with the concept of giving you freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B is a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people that he cannot see, and he requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. So when Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what's the outcome? Potentially Team B feels jealous and dispirited, and they wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Another challenge is internal division within a hybrid team. And in this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time or majority in the office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time or majority remote. If the boss spends most of her time in the office, then the in-office team members have proximity to her that remote members don't. This proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. So what's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced. And they may wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave this organization? And yet another, the final challenge that we're going to talk about of a hybrid workforce regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when an employee chooses to work. For example, profile number one, these are employees who work 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number two are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they need to take an afternoon or a day off to work remotely, no big deal. And then profile number three's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person, in-office meetings and occasionally choose to drop into the office to work or just to socialize. Challenges. How do you accommodate all of these teams, all of these profiles, excuse me? What are the critical requirements of your organization in order to support these profiles? Now, this next slide is really key to awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. What should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles at the same time? Should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any surprise why many organizations feel stuck in their planning? So, those are 3 challenging scenarios. Here are some of the top challenges that result from those scenarios. And you'll see a list developing on the screen. These looming issues showcase the need for organizations to invest time right now, preparing for the future, building consensus, casting a vision to the employees, and ultimately creating a strategy that addresses these challenges, but also a strategy that leverages the benefits of hybrid working to maximize productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and achieving the best financial results. So, Cresa has developed a framework, a couple of conceptual frameworks, and practical roadmaps to tie all of the components of hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy and then help operationalize the strategy. And the first key framework is a concept called be sequential to be successful. And this gets you headed down the right path, and it all starts at the top. We believe the 2 most important elements of success are leadership and culture. It all starts there. That's the umbrella that overhangs all success. Then the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting, retaining talent, and maximizing financial results inform all decisions and drive behavior. However, in order to support these business goals, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, that's the human component, followed by workplace strategy and design, that's the built environment, the shared central office, and then real estate strategy. Where is the office? How much space should we occupy? And who do we need to be proximate to? Clients, employees, etc. So too often, companies skip that first human component of the workforce strategy and they go straight to step 2 or step 3. We feel that's a mistake. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which naturally leads to step 3. be sequential to be successful. And when workforce strategy is addressed first like this, it gives you and your team the freedom to design your workplace with the confidence that you're basing the design and the real estate strategy on meaningful information and that you have consensus to move forward on that strategy, on the real estate strategy. You want to build your design and your real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. And the process is best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to determine and affirm your hybrid workforce strategy. Phase 2 is to operationalize the strategy. Step 1, determine and affirm. It's easy to say, but it's much harder to do. Even those of you who have already determined your strategy may feel compelled to reassess key building blocks of your strategy in light of what you learned today. Now, at a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote, fully office, a hybrid blend of the two, and what percentage in office, out of office, which teams, etc. Okay, so and who's making the decision? Top of the chain of command, or is it someone further down the chain of command at the team leader level even? Let me see. And now, once you've made those decisions, you can move on to phase 2, to operationalize your strategy. But this first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk you through a roadmap for making this decision in a manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key departments of your organization. And those key departments are listed here. It's human resources, information technology, finance, etc. Each of them will make unique contributions to the collective success of the strategy in the organization. So in order to implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that each department is aligned with the others to create integrated organizational infrastructure. Again, that supports the strategy. And part of your due diligence is to uncover, okay, what are the gaps in preparedness for each department? And of course, how can those gaps be filled? And by the way, this is what top talent is looking for. When they consider joining your organization or contemplate whether they should stay in your organization, they're going to want to know a couple things. Number 1, what's your strategy and what are the guidelines? But number 2, they want assurance that this organizational infrastructure has been considered and is in place to support the strategy and their success no matter where they work, or when they work for that matter. So this slide shows the critical requirements of each department necessary to support the larger hybrid strategy. This is the checklist that every organization should work through when affirming their hybrid strategy. At Cresa, we help our clients evaluate all of these requirements in a thoughtful, methodical manner, and we believe this is a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know of anyone else who starts their real estate strategy by evaluating the critical components of an upstream workforce strategy. So we'll send an email with this list to all attendees. No need to jot down every bullet point right now. But we're going to go through some of these in detail for a few of these departments during the webinar. But if you'd like to have a deeper conversation about your specific situation and maybe some examples of what else that we're seeing happen, other companies are doing, please contact us or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. So to go into a little more detail of the human resource critical requirements, I want to introduce my colleague, Paul Springer. Paul is our human resource and operations subject matter expert. He's over 25 years of experience integrating human resource operations, IT, and real estate. And so, Paul, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So as it relates to human resources, one of the most important departments within a hybrid strategy is that human resource department. And as we're looking at the critical requirements to effectively support a hybrid strategy, we're going to start with job roles. So interestingly, although many organizations went to 100% remote during the pandemic over the last couple of years, that doesn't necessarily mean that all roles moving forward are suitable for a full-time work from home. Many roles, as we know, can be done remote, but the better question is, should they be done remote? And in order to achieve the highest productivity, you need to really determine if a role has dependencies or requires in-person collaboration and resources in the office. Otherwise, that role could probably be easily be done from a remote perspective. And then looking at personal aptitude, additionally, if roles are suitable for remote work, the job processes need to have a clear alignment with the hybrid workforce strategy. This could mean automation of paper-based processes and digitizing of files, or reviewing systems, understanding how to best collaborate, and that could be using technology or in the office, depending on the situation. This leads to training for managers and employees. Managers may benefit from training to better manage a dispersed team, where they may have people that are both at home and in an office at the same time. In addition, the technology that enables remote work is constantly changing, and many employees don't know the current suite of tools available to them at their organization, and so that's important to put some focus on as well. Moving on, another key component to this strategy is ensuring transparency and equitable criteria and eligibility guidelines. These should be memorialized and communicated clearly to increase transparency in the organization and make sure that it's something that all employees have the opportunity to understand. And lastly, a key component to this strategy is the employee handbook. We're not talking about the employee handbook from years ago that kind of gets put on a shelf and collects dust. We're talking about a situation where many businesses only focus on the hybrid or remote policy and procedure as they're looking at this. However, with a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook requires a detailed review and update to ensure that the policies are written to align with both a remote team and a team that may be in the office. In addition, we recommend the use of an intranet or other automated communication platform to enable employees to easily access and digest and understand the employee handbook no matter where they're located, whether that be in a remote setting or in the office. Moving on, and speaking of hybrid workforce policies, these policies should address a number of factors, including eligibility requirements, tools and resources the company will provide for home use, what the employee is expected to provide as far as basic standards for internet, a clean and quiet and professional place for them to work, and then expectations for personal performance and participation in meetings, collaboration opportunities, and potentially opportunities where the group in the office and at home are working on a specific project together. And lastly, what constitutes disqualification. And so these are all really important factors as you're building out that policy. And interestingly, a clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they likely will be different from yours. So it's important to really put that focus on there. For a deeper dive into technology now, I want to reintroduce my colleague, Steve Ike. As Jason shared, Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy consulting to several large successful global businesses. So Steve, I hand it over to you.
Paul and Jason both, thank you for that. And as we look at technology, first, to kind of lay some expectations, technology is really more than platforms and applications. Technology is a tool and a resource enabler that can be leveraged to create this connected and collaborative enterprise. As we look at how, when, and where people work, whether it's remote, in the office, or a combination, communication and collaboration platforms are the foundation that we use for this purposeful interaction. And through real-time and near real-time communications, the platforms can be used for anytime, anywhere, one number reach across multiple devices. And when combined with a collaborative and shared workspace, we can then collaborate and share ideas and meet as teams no matter where we are. So the next is stepping into performance management. And the key for productivity is that performance management focuses on employee and team productivity rather than activity. and it aids in the focusing on building trust, empowering employees, and driving those results. And in the past, we always heard, if I can't see, I can't manage. And what we've done is change that to, if I can measure, I can manage. So with performance management, it's both a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and evaluate corporate performance and employee performance. And it gives that foundational information to help managers have meaningful conversation with employees. And it provides real-time access to the information via a visual dashboard so that I can see my scorecard, I can see red, green, blue, how I'm doing and how I'm performing. And in turn, this helps address something that Jason brought up earlier, which was that in-office versus remote tension. And it provides first, consistent, and second, measurable areas around productivity, progress towards goals, and what I can do to help the team drive those business outcomes. And third, with document management, we often think of document management as online storage tools like Dropbox and Google Drive and SharePoint. But really what we do is we combine these with management tools that can be utilized to manage our content, address security, look at workflows and process of how these documents are accessed across the organization. And we look at distribution of documents and files with that as well. So when you think about it, it facilitates real-time and anytime access, addressing process, workflows, and document control. And think about a loan process with a financial services institution or a claims management process for an insurance organization. But it also fits in general business with financial records, HR information, marketing and operations, and even CRM and sales tools that really drive that general business access to information anytime, anywhere. And finally, as we step into cybersecurity and compliance, I'm a little biased, but I often think this is the most overlooked and underanalyzed area for remote work. With more people at home and more connected devices, this provides a chance for others to gain access to critical and secure information. There are technical considerations like separating your wireless network, providing for secure connectivity from my tablet or my cell phone or my laptop. It also looks at intrusion detection. But a big factor is the human factor. We often see human error and threats from within, both intentional and accidental. And as well, we want to look at the physical and logistics of your workspace so that we can ensure, where certain team members can have a locked door and everyone should have a secure laptop. But we want to understand how people work and where people work so that no ears can hear and no eyes can see what the employees are working on. And finally, I'll close out with the personal activities. First, training that focuses on an employee responsibility, but a well-documented and living IT security policy that addresses everything from bring your own device to understanding phishing attacks to establishing the wireless connectivity and the web activity that goes on at home so that we can protect both secure internal information and secure client information. So Jason, I'm going to hand off back to you for kind of the wrap and get to the next steps, and then we'll look forward to Q&A at the end.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, so one more key component that we'll cover today is the real estate component, the real estate that actually supports the people, the physical space. But the concept of office space has changed dramatically because of the pandemic. And so to accommodate these employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations have to view the workplace as a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand spaces. Employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel they'll be the most productive for that day, or even just part of the day, which means it's freedom of movement that's important, whether between workplaces or even inside of a single office. Now, at the same time, in order to make this really effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and the medium of collaboration, whether that medium is virtual or the medium is in person, the office space. Team leaders must be intentional about when to use the medium of digital tools, such as video conferencing, collaboration software like Slack, Teams, etc., versus when to use the medium of the physical office for collaboration. They've got to be intentional about how they use these tools, when they use these tools, ensuring that people who are working remotely on any given day are actively included in in-person meetings, not at a disadvantage of people who are in the office. And we have a lot of consulting and best practices around how to conduct a hybrid meeting. Some people in the office, some people on the video conference. But the main point is a leader has to be intentional and communicate clearly what the expectation is and why they're using one tool versus another. In addition, we think it's really important that leaders model the behavior that they want to see from their employees. They're going to need to make efforts to be organized, prepared, and again, intentional, purposeful about how to make the best use of everyone's time, how to be equitable and inclusive, and how to build this culture of purposeful collaboration. So to make it easy to visualize the steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, we developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of the process. And this is a core part of our workforce strategy consulting, which starts with phase one, which is step one, affirm the strategy. This is to clearly state whether your organization is fully office, fully remote, what degree of hybrid blend, how this is going to work, et cetera. And then to state whether this is an organization-wide mandate or the degree to which this decision is going to be delegated down the chain of command to either departmental or team leaders, or perhaps somehow it's otherwise functionally based, project-based. We always begin with a vision and goals session. This is where you build the project team, establish your goals, and you set a timeline. Next, you'll go through the process of discovery, conducting interviews, surveys, and focus sessions to gather information about all those critical requirements of each company department. Then you'll analyze by developing strategy, ensuring departmental alignment, and determine appropriate solutions. This is the phase that ends with internal affirmation of your strategy. Phase two is the subject of the rest of the webinar. It encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the strategy that you've chosen. So let's talk about the timeline. A timeline gets the whole team on the same page regarding the prioritization of projects and the reality of how long it's going to take. By putting it down on paper for everyone to see and refer to, you'll create the forward momentum that you're looking for to be able to sustain it. Milestones, cost estimates, and guidelines for managers for policy implementation are all critical components. And this ensures that your managers know what the organization will stand behind, that they will stand behind them as long as they follow the guidelines. And to help your managers, we also recommend that you consider categorizing each employee, whether they're on-site, remote, flexible, home office centric. And that'll help managers communicate the plan with transparency and equity. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. This not only means putting the plan in writing, but also documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions, updating contracts, and of course, creating dynamic schedules that detail where and when employees are working. After clear documentation, you'll need to prepare very clear communication and change management plan. It is critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on culture and operations. Preparing a 12-month communication playbook will put you in position to manage that change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles that you're going to use, whether you're going to use Slack, newsletters, town halls, etc. And we recommend a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging, which will help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months. Finally, with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. If there's one thing for certain, wherever you start whatever policy, whatever strategy, it's going to modify and change over time. And you really need to review your strategy every 3 months or so, particularly after the initial rollout, in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas, solicit feedback along the way, measure, and then modify. So, do you remember at the beginning of the webinar when we talked about the inherent bias that everyone brings for either working remotely or working in the office? You know, they have an idea as to what should work out best and certainly what they prefer. Well, that bias can really sway the outcome of your planning. So Cresa helps our clients bridge this gap between the differing opinions in the organization and help ensure that a potentially subjective process remains an objective process. Cresa offers our clients 3 tier levels of support in navigating their hybrid workforce roadmap. Tier 1 is focused on operationalizing a strategy that's already been decided. We review previous discovery activities with our clients, and we use that information to align the departments and then operationalize the strategy. Tier 2 spends more time on the front end helping our client with the discovery process in collaboration with key leaders of the organization. We'll conduct stakeholder interviews, focus sessions, surveys, and then use that information to create a strategy and then operationalize the strategy. And then tier 3 is similar to tier 2, but it takes an even deeper dive across more of the organization during the discovery process. And of course, we modify these tier levels collaboratively with our clients. Sample deliverables from our consulting engagements include an executive summary that includes corporate readiness gaps, recommended strategies, a new hybrid workforce policy, best practices, etc. We deliver a timeline with the milestones and costs. As I mentioned, an updated hybrid workforce policy, sample work agreements, a 12-month communication plan, template job descriptions, and a decision matrix that helps teams determine and then finalize what their strategy is going to be. So with that, let me offer a summary. The desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. As important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy, unique to them, their culture, and their business needs. And to get there, transition is key. How you transition to your new hybrid work environment will determine how competitive you will be to attract and retain talent and to compete with other organizations in the marketplace. Don't underestimate it. Don't short circuit it. This transition is important and can save you a lot of time when done properly, or cost you a lot of time and heartache if you don't really focus on it and take the time to go through the process. And finally, be sequential to be successful. This is really important. Don't skip this step. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize a strategy, be sure that your organizational structure can support it. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all the departments of your organization to ensure alignment and preparedness. Then follow through on all the steps for implementation. That way you'll be in a better position to evaluate ongoing feedback and make continuous improvements. Now there's one last thought that we want to leave you with before we'll go to Q&A. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. Similarly, implementing corporate programs that involve significant change require the same 3 elements. But planning and training don't happen without leadership, without the initiation, without that fire. This is a time that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So, be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your time. That's the end of the official webinar. Now we're going to go to Q&A, but I did want to just for a moment leave our contact information up on the screen before I bring that down and I go to our picture so we can talk for just a moment. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, or you have ideas that you want to share, or you missed a certain piece, or you have others in your organization that you think would benefit from either a conversation or this webinar, please reach out to us, or again, the Cresa advisor who invited you to this webinar. We'd love to talk with you. We have conversations all the time. And we learn also when we talk, the more people we talk to, and the more different scenarios that they're working through. So I'm going to stop share, and that should bring us all back up. And let me go over here to the Q&A. So first question, and I think this looks like this is for Paul. This is kind of interesting. What do you wish companies knew about flexible working? So high level, open-ended question. What do you wish they knew based on, I would assume based on your conversations with them and your experience about flexible working?
So I would say one of the most important things about flexible working, and we touched on it in the webinar, is that there's a couple different things. One, management is different. As Steve touched on, and I think I touched on as well, you're managing, you're measuring productivity, and you're really understanding performance from a different perspective. That your meetings are different. Your people aren't sitting around you, and so you need to be more conversational. You need to be more intentional about how you're meeting with your employees, how you're giving them feedback, how you're, like I said, measuring performance. And it's not something that you just kind of apply the same thing you were doing before. It's something you really need to be intentional about. And then the other piece is you really need to make sure that you're proactive in what you're doing, and it's not just something that you say, well, you know what, I think we want to do hybrid, and so we're just going to let people work from home. There's a lot of operational impact to doing it, and so things like making sure your benefits, compensation, payroll, employment practices, all those different things are aligned, are something you need to do in advance, because if you don't, you're going to be ill prepared and kind of chasing your tail a bit when you actually do implement the strategy.
Yeah, I think, you know, Steve, I want to give you an opportunity to answer the same question, then I'll give you a couple of thoughts I have.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot recently about fatigue in remote work. And one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is when we have back-to-back meetings via web, how are we building margin into our day and our time so that we can get our work done in addition to our online meetings? And with that, it's building in those breaks during the day where you can get away from your desk to separate yourself, but also schedule time in your day so that you can get your regular work done in addition to the meetings that you're in back-to-back.
Yeah, I think there's a good three things that I wish companies knew, or I guess just recognized. One is the importance of trust. I do find it interesting that we still talk to organizational leaders that you can hear there's a concern about whether or not their people will be productive if they don't come back in the office at some point. There's still that sort of old way of thinking. And I think it's a matter of trust. And I think, well, have they been productive for the past 12 to 18 months? They've proven themselves. So I think you're going to need to extend some trust. So that's one thing. Another is, I think, the importance of measuring and modifying and that's where things like performance management can be so helpful to an organization, where you're setting clear key performance indicators. And when you start to measure output versus input of time, or if you can see them, et cetera, it really becomes more fair and equitable to everyone in the organization. You're measured on things that everybody else is going to get measured on, and how well you hit them. And then third, I think the concept of, and I'll have to admit that I stole this concept from a consultant I saw, but I like it because it's very similar to what Cresa says. Cresa's motto is think beyond space, okay? We think beyond space. I think organizations also need to think beyond the schedule. And by that, I mean, this is more than just, you know what, we'll have people work 3 days a week in the office and 2 days at home, or we're done with it. There's hybrid. No, to make this work, you really need to go through all of those critical requirements that we talked about in this webinar. You really need to make sure that your organizational infrastructure is in place to support the people and that everyone is aligned. Human resources, information technology, operations, real estate, finance, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more than just about, okay, we're going to let them work 2 days a week at home. There's much, much more to it. So, all right, so here's another question, which is, what are some best practices for doing a pilot program before affirming your strategy? Anybody want to take that? Best practices for doing a pilot program before affirming your strategy. Anything that you could test out or how you would test it?
I have a few comments, more comments than a response to the question, but I personally think it's best to be prepared and proactive, and maybe not do a test program before you implement a strategy. And you want to make sure that you're following the right process, that you're including your employees, that you're aligning what you're doing with corporate culture and the future direction of the business, and kind of throwing it out there because it's something that you want to do at some point in the future. And piloting something isn't really the most successful model because you're piloting something that you don't really have a core understanding of the components that you want to include. So you're kind of cart before the horse in my view, and I prefer to not have companies do that and to spend.
That makes sense. So you're saying basically go through the process first, then pilot what it is that you have come together or collectively arrived at based on all this information.
Start implementing before it's fully baked, but at least, start that thought process before you implement a pilot.
Yeah. Yep.
And
that makes sense.
That does make perfect sense. And have something that is measurable as a goal. So it's something that is tangible, that is measurable, that is quantifiable, so that when we come through this, we understand from people, process, and technology, when we set the desired outcomes from that pilot, how are we going to measure success and evaluate against those measurement criteria?
Yeah. Okay, so another question. How do we create a hybrid workforce policy that meets the needs of both, I assume that's the emphasis, both employees and the company? Anybody want to take that?
Well, I'll jump in because I think I kind of answered that in the previous question.
Okay.
Not realizing I was doing that, but so I think that in order to do that, you really need to make sure you get the perspective of both of those groups, that you spend the time to, and this is not meant to be a plug for the services that we offer, but our program that we offer does include collecting survey information from employees, holding focus groups, and really getting that perspective from the employees.
Yeah.
Also understanding from the leadership the direction they want to go and their perspective, and then collaborating as a group, and then aligning all those perspectives together with a strategy that potentially meets both. You're not going to make everyone happy, but at least if you're transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing and why you're doing it, then everyone involved will understand this is the direction we're going. Here's why, and here's how it affects you.
Steve, any thoughts? I've got a couple.
Paul covered it quite well when we're looking at how to really optimize that, so it's good.
Well, I think you're right. To meet the needs of both groups, employees and the larger company, you have to talk to, and this kind of sounds like employees versus management. If there's a little bit of a difference of opinion, we need information about what both are thinking to come to a place that works for both. And the more you involve employees in planning, the more buy-in you get, the more engagement you get. And frankly, there's a lot to hybrid working, as we have learned over the past year and a half, that is focused on the needs of the employee. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about. There's different training that is required of managers, or that's needed for managers and employees. There's mentoring programs that are going to look different than they did when everyone was in the office. Onboarding is going to look different. So to meet the needs of both, I think you've got to take a look at all of these, as well as gather information from both leadership and employees. So.
And one other thing I would add is that, you touched on the Great Resignation and people leaving for other opportunities in your discussion earlier. So, people are leaving businesses and going somewhere else where their expectations are being met, where their feedback is being heard. If you're in a place where you're not listening to employees, they're going to go somewhere where they are included, where the expectations are taken into consideration, and you're going to find yourself in an attrition issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a great point to close on. When you think about the Great Resignation, I want to feel valued and important and involved and engaged. So when you're getting that 360-degree feedback, you're involving and getting some of the best ideas coming from your team. So I think that's a great point to close on.
So thank you, everyone. So we're at the end of our time. It's 3:01 on the East Coast, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. If you have more questions, please reach out again to ourselves or the Cresa advisor invited you. You will receive a copy of this presentation, of this webinar, a recorded copy, as well as the most of the deck. And again, we're grateful. Hope everyone has a great, wonderful afternoon, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.